Today, we are mastering the secret math behind elite vehicle tuning. We aren't just talking about slapping on expensive bolt-on parts here. We're diving deep into the absolute fundamentals of precision suspension geometry. So if you want to stop guessing and actually start engineering, well, you are in exactly the right place. Let's get into it.
Look, every single mechanic has seen this, right? The customer drives in completely frustrated. They're like, hey, I just dropped $2,000 on new super stiff springs and performance dampers, but when I brake, the front end still literally nosedives right into the pavement, and when I hit the gas, it squats like a boat. Naturally, they think they bought bad parts. But here is the real truth. Actually, scratch that, it's the golden rule of tuning. It was never a parts problem, it's a geometry problem. And today, we're going to tear apart exactly why that happens.
Okay, here's our masterclass syllabus for today. We'll hit the physics of pitch, sketching the SVIC, architecture limits, the classic lowered car trap, diagnosing geometry versus dampers, and finish up with aero downforce loads.
So, Part 1. The physics of pitch and weight transfer.
Before we even think about touching an alignment rack, we've got to correct a massive misconception. Weight does not actually move forward under braking. I mean, your engine doesn't slide forward, your seats don't move. The center of gravity, it's fixed. What actually changes is the vertical load on each axle. It's a load shift, not a mass shift. Let's put some real-world numbers to this so you can see exactly what your suspension is fighting. Picture a standard 1,500 kilogram car. You slam the brakes at 1 G of deceleration. The math tells us you are throwing a massive 295 kilogram load shift directly onto the front axle. That is nearly 300 kilos literally trying to violently rotate the nose of that car straight down into the asphalt.
To fight that rotation, we use what's called anti-dive geometry. Now here's the core formula. Anti-dive percentage equals the tangent of theta times the wheelbase divided by h times the brake bias ratio. Okay, don't let the math scare you, just look at that crucial h sitting right there in the denominator. That h represents your center of gravity height. Because it divides the whole equation, a higher center of gravity severely tanks your pitch resistance percentages. Basically, if you're working on a tall truck, you're going to need some incredibly aggressive arm angles just to fight that high CG. Moving on to Section 2, let's find that side view instant center, or SVIC for short. Now that we've got the math down, let's head out to the shop floor and map this formula to the actual physical metal on the vehicle. Here is your 5-step diagnostic procedure to sketch out that SVIC. Number 1, and listen very closely to me on this one, secure the vehicle safely on a perfectly level alignment rack. Absolutely no crawling under a car on uneven ground with some basic floor jacks for this. Just don't do it. Number 2, load the car at its actual driven ride height. That includes fuel and the driver's weight. 3, use a plumb line to mark your inner and outer suspension pivot axes. 4, extend those lines on a piece of cardboard or in CAD until they intersect. Boom, that intersection, that's your SVIC. Finally, step 5, just draw a line from the tire's contact patch to that SVIC and measure the angle. That angle right there, that's the theta for our formula.
Okay, on to Section 3. Suspension architecture tuning limits.
So you've got your angle, but can you actually change it? Well, that depends entirely on what the factory engineers decided to give you to work with. Take a look at the massive difference in tuning freedom between these setups. Double wishbone? It's the absolute gold standard. It gives you precise, totally independent control over both the upper and lower arm angles, which means you can place your SVIC practically anywhere you want. But the MacPherson strut? You are severely limited there. Because the strut itself acts as the upper member, you're locked into tight packaging constraints. We're talking maxing out at just 15 to 35% anti-dive. If you're trying to build a dedicated track car out of a strut chassis, man, you're going to be fighting that ceiling all day long.
Which brings us to Section 4, the classic lowered car trap. Let's look at what I genuinely consider the #1 mistake rookie tuners make when they're just trying to make a car look aggressive. Remember our frustrated customer from the beginning? Well, here is exactly why their lowered car is squatting. On an independent rear suspension, the half shaft essentially acts as a control arm in the side view. At the stock ride height, that half shaft angle is either horizontal or angling slightly upward toward the differential. That is great for anti-squat. But when you slam the car to lower it, the differential stays put while the outer knuckle drops. Suddenly, your half shaft angle is pointing downward. You haven't touched a single pivot point, but just by dropping that ride height, you've shifted the SVIC straight into the dirt and absolutely nuked your anti-squat geometry.
So how do we fix it? Look, throwing stiffer and stiffer springs at it is not going to solve the math. The real setup adjustments have to restore those half shaft and control arm angles. First things first, you've always got to recalculate your new SVIC. From there, you can toss in a differential drop kit to lower the diff and level out those half shafts. Or you might install geometry-corrected knuckles to raise the outer pickup points, or use adjustable inner pivot brackets. The major takeaway here? Half-shaft angle corrections are absolutely mandatory if you want to restore your mechanical anti-squat. All right, Section 5, diagnosing geometry versus dampers out on the road.
Let's say a car rolls into the shop, and we need to hit the road for a test drive to figure out, do we have bad shocks or do we have bad math? If your geometry has too little pitch resistance, the springs and dampers are basically forced to do all the heavy lifting. Out on the test drive, you're going to feel this continuous, sort of progressive nosedive under braking, accompanied by this dramatic pitch rocking, kind of like a seesaw, as the rear end lifts up at the exact same time. And because the suspension is blowing through such a massive range of travel, your brake bias is going to feel super inconsistent. Hit the gas, you'll probably get rear wheel spin because the geometry just isn't planting those tires. If you're feeling all that from the driver's seat, your geometry is definitely too weak.
But on the flip side, what happens if you overdo it and add way too much resistance? The suspension literally binds up. Under hard braking, the front end is going to feel super harsh, like it's kicking back at you, because the metal suspension links are absorbing the bumps instead of your springs. You might even feel some violent brake steer trying to rip the wheel from your hands. Under acceleration, extreme anti-squat causes what we call rear jacking. The back of the car actually rises up, unloads the rear tires, and bam, sudden loss of traction on corner exit. You absolutely have to balance your anti-dive and anti-squat, or you'll completely destroy the ride quality.
Okay, final stretch. Section 6, race targets and aero loads. Let's graduate from the street for a second and look at some advanced track tuning concepts. Notice how wildly different our anti-squat targets get depending on the discipline. A road race car really needs compliance to handle curbs, so we typically target a nice balanced 50 to 80%. A heavy street truck, that needs to fight massive cargo loads, so it usually sits higher, right around 100 to 130%. But look at the drag car, 100 to 200% anti-squat? Crazy, right? But they are intentionally breaking all the rules of comfort to aggressively launch the vehicle upward, violently transferring weight right onto those rear tires for maximum launch grip off the line.
Now, let's see how this whole puzzle changes when we add high speeds into the mix. At, say, 200 kilometers per hour, a race car generates massive aero downforce. But unlike static weight, which acts way up high at the center of gravity, downforce acts at the aerodynamic center of pressure, which is super close to the ground. Because this aero load is applied so low, it drastically reduces the pitch moment. Translation? At high speeds, you actually need significantly less mechanical anti-dive geometry to keep the car stable than you do at low mechanical grip speeds. Pretty cool, right? So we've covered the physics, the formulas, SVIC measurements, and all the traps of lowering a car. And it really all comes down to this one final provocative thought. You can spend $10,000 bolting on literally the absolute best hardware in the world. But if your SVIC math is broken, does your geometry actually let those fancy parts work? Hardware is nothing without the underlying math. Keep that in mind the next time you put a car on the lift.